Howdy gamers, we're back with a lockdown optimization video. Today I'm going to use the very normal and not at all obsessive amount of hours I've put into this game to teach you the things I wish I knew going into lockdown, the primary mode of play for most folks. For those who don't know, Lockdown is basically the medium difficulty of ABI, featuring slightly enhanced loot, reduced amounts of AI operators, or play-I for short, a 1 million Cohen gear cap, as well as access to all maps. Let's get you ready for your raids. So, one of the most important things when you queue into Lockdown is going to be your ammo. But a lot of you might not be bringing in the right ammo. So for assault rifles or like any full auto gun, what you're going to be looking for is tier 4 ammo on most maps. So there's obviously a couple different Lockdown maps: Northridge, Farm, Valley, Armory, and TV Station. Some maps you're going to want to just go full tier 4 ammo and you'll be fine. Valley, Farm, Northridge, you're probably going to be fine full committing to tier 4 ammo for your assault rifles. But for Armory and for TV Station, there's a lot of big men in these lobbies. And in those cases, you might want to commit a bit of tier 5 ammo into those games. At the very least, I want you walking away from this video just basically under the idea that tier 4 ammo is the bare minimum for Lockdown. It is by far the most important thing. If you bring a big fancy gun that you spent 500k on, but then you only put tier 3 ammo in, then basically anything that you come up against, you're going to be on the back foot. You're just going to take upwards of 10 or more rounds in the chest to take down your target. That's what we're trying to avoid here. So ammo, most important thing. But very important thing in this mode is also armor. And I see a lot of people making mistakes on their armor in this mode. Same thing as ammo. Armor also has 6 tiers. Tier 4, Tier 5, Tier 6 are the most common. But Tier 5 armor is probably one of the more valuable things that you're going to spend your money on. 300k for armor compared to like the probably 100 you'd be spending on tier 4 armor is not super appealing. However, you saw me on Deke's trade list. This guy is going to save you tons of money. He will sell you 926 body armor. If you saw this sell for 300k on the market, 200k right here. And more importantly, a ton of tier 5 armored rigs. Now, these first three, the H-Chac Warrior and then the second H-Chac, these guys are decent trades, 160, 170, and then 200 for some pretty okay tier 5 armor. But one of the best trades in the game that we have right now is going to be here for the Defender M4 armored rig. This thing has 100 points of durability, the second highest overall durability of any tier 5 armor at all. And the only other alternative to this, the BT6, yeah, you're not buying this. You're not going to be consistently running this in your Lockdown games. This, though, through 310 to 350 for some of the best tier 5 armor in the game with incredible storage to back it up, pretty good deal. So on the topic of Deke as well, there's different types of bags you can trade for. Now, a lot of these bag trades, and also honestly just the mid-tier bags in general, trading or buying, are kind of bad deals. However, these big bag trades at the bottom of the list are the only profitable bag trades that you can get. We're seeing here that the field bag is 120 for the trade. Really, really nice stuff. You should almost always be buying these, again, on cooldown. Basically, if you ever believe in yourself going into these raids. A lot of these bags that you're going to be buying off the market, Chapman is usually like 90k, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 90k. For how many slots is this? 30 slots? Why not spend an extra 10k for an extra 10 slots? Spend a little bit of extra money, max out your slots instead of buying the mid-tier bag. So lastly, in the gear section, we have the helmets that you'll have access to. Now, this is a slightly harder question to answer. Tier 4 armor has quite a few reasonable deals that you can get through Deke. The same can't really be said for Tier 5 helmets. Now, the ones that I almost always end up with almost every single raid is the AN95 and the O3 heavy tack helmet. These things, however, are 300k and they only max out at tier 4 face shields. And what this means in practice is that if somebody's running, M80s or tier 4 ammo into DMR or tier 5 ammo in a assault rifle, is that you still have the possibility of getting one shot through these tier 4 face shields. This isn't always worth 300k, or in the case of like the O3, probably a little bit less, but then you have to buy the headphones. So if you really, really want tier 5 armor with audio built in. The O3 and the A95 are going to be your only options because these come with face shields. The FA Assault does not. But if you want to try easing into running tier 5 armor, or tier 5 helmets rather, the SH60 might be a place that you can look instead. It is a relatively cheap tier 5 helmet that comes with a tier 4 face shield, protects your head and your ears while only having a minor amount of sound blocking. It brings you down to 90% instead of 100%. Another option that you can do if you end up playing a lot of armory or close range maps is also the Matska 2. This has severe sound blocking. It is a blast helmet, but it has a tier 5 helmet and tier 5 face shield. Now this is going to be really, really bad versus DMRs that are running tier 5 ammo. But if you're fighting a guy who's full tier 4 ammo, this thing is going to keep you very, very hard to kill. I see a lot of these helmets, and I frankly die to a lot of these helmets while playing Lockdown Armory. It's a pretty reasonable, affordable option. Only downside is, again, severe sound blocking. Specifically running this as a solo is a pretty hard sell for me. I almost never run this, but as a team helmet, as long as someone on your team has audio, you can probably get away with buying some of these guys like New or Warren. It's a pretty good deal. So I'm going to talk about like the approach that I take to building my guns before I start showing you specific builds so that you can basically walk away from this informed on how to build your own builds. Various attachments in this game have different costs and then have different benefits. So grips are a prime example. There's 5k grips and then there's 150k value grips. So how do you know what to run? A lot of attachments in this game, a lot of the cheap ones give very, very small benefits for a very, very small cost. You want to avoid these. But there's also attachments that are really, really, really expensive that'll also give you some pretty high stat boosts. You also want to avoid these. If you're trying to kit out your gun for like a cost-effective lockdown build, you want to be looking for attachments in the middle of the pack. So in the case of grips, for example, that's like something between the RKO, the triangle grip, or the original tilt grip. Those are just some examples, though. We're going to start going into specific builds for the different guns that I would recommend you bring into your lockdown game. This is going to be a hell of a list, so lock in. First gun might be the most common option in all of Lockdown, and for good reason. It's once again the AK-12. This thing is a very, very difficult gun to break, but unlike a lot of other ARs you're going to see on this list, this is also one of the best scope spraying ARs, if not the best scope spraying AR in the game. Just like before, there is still a Joel trade that you can do to get the base parts of this for cheap, but even if you're not doing that, this gun is still going to be reasonably affordable. It's the every gun. It has almost no recoil, it has a high enough rate of fire that it can do anything you want it to do, and it'll do all of those things without breaking the bank. Most builds you're going to see for this gun are going to be under 300k. Next gun on the list is going to be the M4. Now, this is a gun whose build I got so much love for over time, especially for Season 2. This is probably one of the most popular gun builds that I would give to people, and it was probably my most used gun in Lockdown, as well as actually Forbidden. That being said, Season 3 saw quite a few price increases for this gun, especially compared to the AK-12. It doesn't quite feel as good as it used to. AK-12 overall has a little bit less recoil, more expensive, similar rate of fire, worse recoil. It's not the most appealing set of options, but I would also say that you're not full trolling if you run this gun either. The only recommendation I'm giving you, though, is to not spruce this up too far beyond 300k. I've seen a lot of M4s that people, build suppressor, 4x scope, they put the cheek pad on this thing, and all of a sudden, you're spending 500k on this M4. Well, hey, what else costs 500k? A H4. The best gun in the game. This build, especially if you put like a red dot on it, is not gonna let you down very often. Next gun here is gonna be the AUG. So there's not actually a lot you can do with this thing. You literally only have two decisions to make. Do you want to run the base scope, or do you want to run a certain type of red dots? Do you want to suppress it? Those are the questions that you have to ask yourself. I like running a flash hider because I actually have a couple of recoil problems on this gun. That also means that I would not recommend running it with a scope. I would recommend instead running it with whatever your preferred 1x optic is, or just run it with the base scope. I actually like this option quite a bit. It's only 1.5 magnification. It's not going to be too much for you to control recoil-wise. eyes. Because it has a black crosshair, you're not often going to lose track of the optic in the sun or in bright objects behind your target. It just works out of the box. And you can also throw this 200k price tag in the bin, because one of the best trades in the game behind the Defender M4 in my eyes is just buying this thing from Randall for 120k. This next caliber is going to be the 5.8 caliber, the T951 and the T03. So these guns are pretty reasonable and normal, and they're also reasonable in lockdown, and frankly, even up to forbidden. Even though the effective range is only 47, it's also like a pretty decent scope spraying gun due to its low recoil. Just don't try to do too much crazy range stuff with it, because again, its effective range is quite low. At least as far as the recoil, this thing is not going to let you down. T03, in the meantime, hits a little harder, has technically a bit more range, even if the recoil doesn't always work that way in practice. But again, if you're just looking for like a red dot gun where you can put tier 4, or honestly, even for lockdown, the tier 5 ammo, top loading that is not going to break your bank. Running either of these things in like maybe some closer range maps is not really going to let you down. I actually run this quite a bit in my games. All right, next gun on the list is going to be the P90. Now, this thing is actually crazy. It's crazy in efficacy, but also in price. This is probably going to be one of the more expensive guns that I recommend you on this list for lockdown. That being said, it is an incredibly unique gun. 1,000 RPM is an absolute bullet hose. Even with tier 4 ammo, you're probably going to be able to outshoot just about anything. Now, the jump in recoil at the beginning of this gun, followed by basically nothing besides wiggle, is a very weird thing to get used to. If you do decide to run this, I would recommend you go into the shooting range, get used to the recoil before you use it, because this is an expensive gun to run. It's an expensive gun with how much ammo is put out at the other end, but you will win fights, especially in CQC, just because you have this gun. Another SMG that I don't love, but is actually pretty okay as far as cost effectiveness goes, is the MPX here. It has definitely some problems at range and is outperformed in every way compared to the P90. This thing really wants to be an AR, but can't quite get there. All that being said, the extra ADS movement speed and the extra ADS speed in general that SMGs give you benefit this gun a lot and make it a pretty reasonable option at close range. The best 9mm option that you'll have access to here. So next we got some really beefy options here. The AEK. This was an iconic gun that used to be a huge part of the meta up until relatively recently. It's been used a little bit less after some of its recoil nerfs, but it still remains one of the best CQC and mid-range ARs in the game. High fire rate, paired with the 7.62 BP round, has incredibly high armor damage. In practice, what that means is that if you catch someone off guard while you're using an AEK with at least tier 4 ammo, they're going to fall over. Compared to some ARs, this thing is not quite as good at mid-range, especially as it used to be, but it still is functional as long as you're able to control the relatively hefty recoil that is on this thing. It is mostly vertical recoil, not horizontal recoil. So what we got for the AK in particular is some relatively higher range attachments. Specifically, the buttstock here is sometimes even 100k, but I promise you, just look at these stat differences. It is worth it. It pays for itself. All right, next gun on the list is going to be the ZC, which is basically the AK's little brother. I'm frankly not a huge fan of this gun. I really thought I was going to be. It's basically an AK with a little bit less rate of fire, one less damage per shot, with slightly less recoil as well, so it's like theoretically a little bit easier to use, as well as a little bit better at mid-range. Unfortunately, the reduction in recoil is not quite enough in my eyes to justify it in practice. Specifically, the start of the spray vertical recoil as well as the end of spray horizontal recoil make this gun pretty rough to use. That being said, as long as you're putting a red dot on it, you're probably still going to have a fine time. Now, this isn't quite a real marksman rifle in my eyes. It's a bit of a jack-of-all-trades gun, as well as an absolute cannon at close range is going to be the MK. So this gun does have a couple of problems, and it mostly boils down to gun feel. It has some of the highest felt recoil in the game, as well as an incredibly long gun length. But this gun is pretty versatile in that you can put a red dot on it and have a really good close range CQC rifle with a very high DPS. 7.6251 is a very big round to be shooting at someone at 700 RPM, or you can still put like a decent medium range scope on it, be tapping people and still have reasonably high DPS compared to other Marksman rifle options. The one big selling point this gun has, and this is why I adore this thing in lockdown, is if you are running M80 tier 4 ammo, you will be able to one-shot a tier 4 helmet in the head. That is an automatic gun where if you're within your effective range, you can actually one-tap. This is one of the only guns in the game that has this property. Now, unfortunately, tier 5 and tier 6 ammo will not one-tap their respective helmet types. Moving on to real Marksman rifles, first we have the SVD. This is really prioritizing the ergo. 49 ergo for a scoped rifle that is this big and this beefy is crazy. It fixes a lot of the versatility issues that this gun had, and just generally makes it a lot less clunky than it used to be in the past. Now, one thing that's a little bit weird that you might see here, and I'm going to be recommending this scope on a lot of my single shot options, is the 4x ACOG. Now, this is a very, very unpopular scope. It's got an awkward sight picture, and it has an additional ergo hit that clicky scopes don't have. So, like, for example, the 1.4, the 7x, the 6x scopes, all of those scopes have better ergo than any over-under scopes. The reason why this scope in particular is going to be on a lot of the builds you're going to see today is not because it's good, but rather because it's cheap. This is a 30k scope right now, and in Season 3, basically all of the clicky scopes, literally every single one, has had its price cranked way the hell up to 80, 90, 100k, whereas this one remains down the bottom at 30k. So after that, we have the M110, which is probably one of the more iconic and well-rounded marksman rifles in the game. Now, the one thing that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're running any single shotgun, I was specifying that tier 4 ammo is the minimum that you should likely use for your ARs. Well, for these single shotguns, you know, M110, SVD, as well as the bolt actions I'll be getting into, you're going to want to bring at least tier 5 ammo into these lockdown raids, at the very least top loaded. If someone is bringing in tier 5 armor and you're running a single shot gun with tier 4 ammo, you're going to have to hit them upwards of 5, 6, 7 times to actually be able to pierce their armor. And if they're running tier 5 armor, tier 5 helmet, and you're running tier 4 ammo, you lose the ability to one tap. Makes those big people almost impossible to take down. You always want to be able to have a plan to kill anybody you see. In that case, you got to have tier 5 ammo at the very least loaded into your butt if you see big men like that. All that being said, M110 remains as one of the most versatile DMR options, usable at close range, just spamming, but also very, very good within 80 meters. You can one-tap within 80 meters as long as your round pierces their helmet, and beyond 80 meters, you can kill them in 2 headshots. It's a pretty good option overall. Next on the list is going to be the bolt action options in this game. So I don't use these a ton as primaries, but the M24 and the Mosin are extremely effective sidearm options. I keep mentioning big men and, like, you know, people wearing tier 5 and occasionally even tier 6 armor as motivators and things you have to plan around. Well, having a backup bolt action is one of the easiest ways to handle that. You can run a Mosin or an M24, load it up with tier 5 ammo in the mag, maybe bring like 3 or 4 tier 6 Randall rounds in your secure container. All of a sudden, you can one-tap them. If they just overcommit, if they overpeak you even once, you have the ability to take them down in a single shot. This is the Mosin option that I'm going to be using here. It does come with its own proprietary scope, as well as the mid-tier stock. That being said, if you want to bring this in as a primary instead of a backup gun, there is a new modern stock option that once again lets you bring in whatever kind of scope you want instead of only using the Mosin proprietary 3.5 scope. Very, very easy to strip if you want to bring this gun in. Now, the M24 has better ballistics and higher ergo across the board, but you're going to be basically unable to one tap beyond its 120 meter effective range. However, if you're playing a map like Armory or TV or something, where a lot of your engagements are for sure going to be under 120 meters, the M24 is just a better option, at least as far as your head clicking. Very, very cheap at 100k. Again, once you're done with it, you just take off whatever rail system. So the Picatinny rail here is a 1x1, so regardless of the scope you put on it, you can just take that rail off, your secondary is bagged up, and you can trade it for whatever gun you found on the ground, maybe an HK, after you blew his head off with M61. Very, very satisfying. So the last gun in the bolt action option is going to be the SJ, and this is a cannon. This thing is a very, very, very scary weapon. And the reason for this is because if you are running tier 5 ammo, for example, you can one-shot someone who is wearing tier 4 armor in the chest. You don't even need a headshot. If they have armor that matches your ammo, it will take a second shot or a headshot. And again, just always bring at least tier 5 ammo. If you see a big man, reactively load the tier 6 in. Just don't bring this as a secondary. This is a primary gun. It is probably be the most lethal bolt action you're going to use in the game. A lot of the gear that I mentioned are going to be pretty expensive when you put it together. To reduce your kit value is going to be to fold up things or just generally take them off of your character and put them in your inventory. Also, if you just don't want to bring expensive bags, you can just decide to bring the medium camping bag instead. You don't have to bring things that are this expensive. And, you know, again, if we're talking about expenses, cheaper armor is always going to be an option. I recommend bringing in a lot of points of healing. I had a lot of people questioning if we need to bring in 900 points of healing, and what I will say is that E3 kits and below are extremely cheap. So, mil kits, 2,000 E3s, 14k for one of them. They're not going to break your bank, but what will break your bank is if you die because you didn't have enough healing. Moving on from that, we have the mag and utility setup. So we see here that this is probably a loadout that I'd want to bring into like TV or Armory. So the culture on those maps are quite a bit more harsh than Farm and Valley. Because of that, I end up bringing in tier 5 top-loaded ammo. So what this looks like, this is going to be my primary mag that's going into the gun, the 60-rounder. Tier 4 on the bottom, tier 5 on the top, and then load that in the gun. And then in the backup mag, we have tier 4 ammo. So what this will look like in practice is, you know, I'll do whatever PvP I'm doing with a 60-round mag, and then when I have a second, I will reload, and then there's a keybind that you can press. It's in the game right now. It's Alt-V. By default, if you just press it, it'll look at the first mag in your inventory, and then load in the biggest round that you have into it. So that's ammo and repacking figured out. After that, I would still recommend a grenade setup that is similar to this. Stuns specifically are incredible. Stun grenades will be able to get hit markers through walls. So if you think someone's, like, for example, just in a building. Some buildings are small enough where you can just put a stun in them, and if someone's in there, you'll get a hit marker. If someone's sitting in a corner, throw a stun. You get a hit marker, they're in the corner. In some cases, you might want to bring even more than this, but this is what I would recommend as the bare minimum of your util going into a lockdown game. Lastly, I haven't really mentioned this a ton, is your audio. So there's a bunch of different types of headsets in the game, and normals, I recommended M32s as one of the cheaper options, but beyond that, there's also ZO38s, Commanders, and GS2s. So ZO38s, in my eyes, are pretty rough to use. The sound profile in them is fucking dreadful. So the only real options, if you're not wearing a helmet with built-in audio, like the AN95, is the Commanders or the GS2s. Now, Commanders, it's going to be pretty easy to tell where someone is around you if you're wearing Commanders. They have high sound blocking, as well as the second best audio in the game. What this means is that what you're hearing is going to be pretty clear and is generally going to make sense to you, and it'll also make sounds in the environment like wind and rain very, very quiet. However, in most conditions, the GS2s are going to be a overall better option if you are used to them. And the reason for this is because the GS2s have some of the highest audio range in the game. It's not always going to give you the best details of where someone exactly is, but it is the best headset in the game, bar none, at telling you, hey, someone is in this direction. Beyond that, I think the last thing I want to go over is what should be in your secure container. So obviously you see right here that I have the 3x3 done, which is accomplished by completing all of the quests in Season 3. Generally speaking, what you should be doing with your case is prioritizing your ammo first and foremost. So if you're just going into, like, you know, a basic lockdown raid, you're probably just going to put 2 stacks of whatever your tier 4 ammo is. This is going to be one of the most reasonable things to put in this container. You almost never want to have gold ammo loose in your rig or backpack unless it is absolutely necessary. If you have bigger containers, like you saw with the 2x3, I like bringing in a backup mag. Now, what you saw before is you saw me have a whole mag in the back here. And what this does is it lets you have a full mag stacked however you want, with whatever ammo that you want, ready to be used whenever you want. Right now, we're only committing 90 rounds into the raid. Now, what having a second mag in our container does is it allows us to have a second PvP big man killing ready mag to us whenever we want. Now, if we press R to reload, this will never be brought into the gun. What we're going to have to do is to open up the inventory and then drag this manually into the gun. Now, this might have some finicky issues like we're seeing right here. We might have to manually drag this mag out and then this mag in, but it's still going to be cheaper than having a whole extra mag, a whole like extra 60 rounds of big ammo risked in our chest rig or backpack. One last thing to note about pills is that pills that you buy on the market are, I think, always going to have operational supplies tagged onto them. You're going to want probably just to buy LPs and only be using these pills if you bring them out from a raid where they're not operational supplies. So in case I didn't have any backup pills, my inventory would probably look something like this. This is a pretty reasonable setup. All right, I think that that's pretty much everything that you're going to need for your lockdown raids. If this ended up helping you, please let me know in the comments below. I play a ton of lockdown, so this is the kind of style that suits me. But if you guys have your own ideas and preferences, let me know. And that's all for me, so have a good day, guys. Bye-bye.